I woke up this morning and for a second, I didn't know where I was. Not the room, not the bed, not even myself. It's strange, isn't it? How we carry a version of ourselves that looks awake, that smiles, that nods, and yet there's this hollow part that nobody really sees. I think about that quiet part a lot. The one that whispers, it's too tired to try, too weary to hope, too scared to even breathe too loud. Sometimes I lie in bed and realize I'm carrying conversations I never had, feelings I never voiced, moments where I betrayed myself just to keep the peace, to appear fine, while inside a small storm kept rolling unnoticed. And yet here I am. Every morning I wake up like it's nothing, like the night didn't scrape me raw, like I didn't watch myself shrink in the dark. I catch myself staring in the mirror and asking, who are you today? And I don't even know the answer anymore. I've built walls so high around certain parts of me that I forget they exist. And then when no one is looking, those walls feel like they're closing in. The silence can be loud, piercing, almost unbearable. There are mornings when I feel my own heart beating in my chest and I'm ashamed because it's too heavy, too restless. I don't tell anyone, but sometimes I resent the very energy that keeps me going because it reminds me how tired I am, how human, how painfully vulnerable. And I realize maybe it's not the world that's hard. It's me expecting myself to be something I'm not. I remember lying awake and thinking about all the times I said yes when I wanted to scream no. All the moments I stayed quiet while my soul begged to be heard. And I realized that's where the exhaustion comes from. Not from the doing, but from the silence. The silence I've been carrying like a stone in my chest for years. There's a strange shame in admitting you're afraid of yourself sometimes. Afraid of the thoughts that crawl in when no one is watching. Afraid of the loneliness that doesn't need company to hurt. Afraid of remembering who you were before the world taught you to hide. It's exhausting. You feel like you've been living on autopilot for so long that even joy feels foreign. I want to tell you about mornings like these, the ones that feel heavy before the sun even rises. I want to tell you how it feels to swallow pieces of your own heart because it's too much for anyone else. I want to tell you that sometimes the person staring back at you in the mirror is just a reflection of all the compromises you made to survive. And maybe somewhere in that reflection, there's a part that's quietly screaming for recognition, for tenderness, for just a little acknowledgement that it exists. Sometimes I lie there and I cry quietly, not because something terrible happened, but because nothing happened. Just the endless repetition of living, the quiet monotony that grinds you down until you forget what it feels like to be untethered, even for a moment. And yet here I am, awake, breathing, existing. I think about the self-betrayals, the subtle ones, the ones nobody would ever notice, but that stack up like bricks in your chest. The moments you gave your energy where it was never reciprocated. The moments you smiled when you wanted to scream. The nights you pretended to sleep while your mind was racing through every regret, every unspoken word, every fragment of who you wished you could be. I wonder if everyone else feels this or if I'm alone. And then I think, maybe the fact that I've been brave enough to feel it, to name it in my head, maybe that's enough. Maybe that's what surviving looks like, even when it doesn't feel like it. Some mornings I wake up and feel like I'm running in circles, chasing an invisible version of myself. The one that's allowed to be free, the one that doesn't need to hide, the one that isn't scared of its own shadows. And I realize the chase is exhausting because that version of me feels so distant, almost like a stranger I once knew. I want to tell you about the quiet despair of feeling inadequate even when you're doing fine. The way your chest tightens when you remember every mistake, every hurt, every time you gave too much and received nothing. How that weight doesn't go away, it just hides under the routines, the coffee, the conversations, the small gestures that pretend life is okay. There's a loneliness in waking up and realizing that you've been carrying yourself like this for years. Alone in plain sight, surrounded by people who can't see the cracks because you've mastered the art of invisibility. And yet those cracks are alive. They're loud in the silence. They remind you of what you've buried, what you've ignored, what you've tried to forget. I remember one morning not long ago lying in bed and feeling like my own body had betrayed me, like it refused to carry the weight I asked it to, like it knew I wasn't being honest with myself. And I thought, maybe that's what it means to be human, to feel betrayal from within, to wake up each day knowing you're carrying a fragile self through a world that doesn't pause for fragility. I don't want to sound sad. I don't want this to feel heavy. But there's a truth here I can't hide. Some mornings the hardest thing isn't facing the world, it's facing yourself. And the most courageous thing isn't making it through. It's acknowledging pieces of yourself you've ignored. The ones you tucked away because they were too raw, too ugly, too painful. I want to tell you that sometimes the person you are inside is different from the one everyone sees. That you might be soft where they expect steel, trembling where they expect composure, unsure where they expect certainty. And that's not failure. That's not weakness. That's just you, whole, even when broken, fragile, even when resilient. Sometimes I think about all the mornings I woke up and pretended everything was fine, while inside I felt like I was unraveling. And I think about the mornings I wanted to scream, to run, to disappear, and I didn't. I stayed. I sat with the heaviness. I let the silence wrap around me. And in that silence, I started to notice the small truths, the whispers of my own heart, the quiet resilience that had been there all along, waiting to be seen. I lie there sometimes and think about how easy it would be to give up, to stop trying, to stop pretending. And then I catch a glimpse of myself in the window or in the reflection of my phone screen, and I think, you're still here. And somehow that's enough for now. I want to tell you that the mornings are the hardest. Not because the world is cruel, but because the world is quiet. And in that quiet, you meet yourself. And yourself is messy, complicated, hurt, beautiful, confused, tender, and real. And for some reason, the world asks you to show up anyway. And you do. You show up again, ND again, even when it hurts, even when you're unsure, even when you're exhausted. I think about all the little betrayals I've committed against myself. The times I've silenced my feelings, dismissed my own pain, pretended I didn't need rest, didn't need care, didn't need love. And I realize how heavy that is. How small acts of self-denial can pile up until you feel buried. And I wonder how many mornings I'll wake up carrying that weight before I finally look it straight in the eye. And I think, maybe mornings are not about hope. Maybe mornings are about truth. About showing up and noticing the parts of yourself you've ignored, about allowing the exhaustion, the fear, the shame, the quiet grief to exist without judgment, about finally seeing yourself in all your fractured, trembling humanity. There's a tenderness in admitting that you're scared of the day, that you're tired of pretending, that sometimes the world is too loud and too demanding, and the silence is the only place you can breathe. And in that admission, there's a kind of courage, a kind of honesty that doesn't need applause, that doesn't need validation, that just needs recognition from yourself. I think about how easy it is to lose yourself in routines, in obligations, in the expectations of others. How easy it is to forget that you are more than the sum of your duties, your appearances, your successes, your failures. That beneath all that, there's a fragile, aching self that longs to be noticed, even in this man. I list ways, and I want you to hear this not as advice, not as inspiration, not as something to cling to, but as a quiet truth. The mornings are heavy. The mornings are vulnerable. The mornings are real. And in that reality, you exist. You exist with all your contradictions, all your failures, all your quiet strength, all your hidden tears. And that existence, messy, trembling, uncertain, is enough. I lie in bed and think about the moments when life feels too big to carry, when fear coils around my chest, when doubt whispers that I'm not enough. And yet somehow I breathe. Somehow I face the day. Somehow I honor the small resilience that has carried me here, from yesterday to today, from darkness to here. Sometimes the hardest part isn't getting through the day. It's staying with yourself long enough to notice that you've survived it. That you've existed despite the weight, despite the wounds, despite the quiet betrayals, despite the fear. That you are still here, still breathing, still carrying yourself forward, one trembling step at a time. And maybe that's all mornings are for. Not for glory, not for motivation, not for the world to see, just for noticing yourself, for feeling yourself, for holding the parts of you that no one else will ever see and saying quietly, I see you, I know you, you exist. And that is enough, you think. Think about the quiet moments most people never see, the ones that happen when the world isn't looking, and you're not pretending to be anything other than yourself. The ones where your chest feels too heavy, your mind too loud, and you're not even sure how you got here to this place inside your own head where everything feels both too small and too big at the same time. There are mornings when I wake up and for a second I don't recognize the person I've become. Or maybe I recognize them too well, and it's terrifying because I know all their scars, all their mistakes, all the things they buried to keep moving forward. And it's strange how easy it is to carry pain in silence, how natural it feels to fold it into your body like a familiar coat, even though it's worn and ragged and smells faintly of old regrets. Nobody tells you that this kind of carrying doesn't show on the outside. How it can look like life is flowing smoothly while inside there's a storm that nobody has the map to navigate. Sometimes I lie in bed and feel the weight of conversations I never had, the words I swallowed because it seems safer to let them die quietly, to let the silence take their place. And then I realize that silence becomes heavy. It becomes a thing you carry like a stone in your chest that never gets lighter. I think about the way I've smiled while my soul was screaming, how I've nodded while my heart was breaking quietly in some corner of my body that no one could touch. And the most exhausting part is knowing that nobody will ever see those moments, that there is a version of me that exists entirely in shadows, and yet it's real, and it aches, and it demands attention that it will rarely receive. I remember nights when I felt like my mind was a cage, circling and circling around every regret, every self-betrayal, every tiny fragment of fear that I couldn't name. And in those nights, the silence becomes a loud thing, almost unbearable, because it's just you and all the parts of yourself you've been too polite, too scared, too ashamed to acknowledge. And I wonder sometimes if everyone feels this, or if I am alone in the strange, quiet terror of simply being inside my own skin. The truth is, I carry these unspoken moments not because I want to, but because I don't know any other way to live. It feels like survival. It feels like breathing. And it feels like a betrayal at the same time, because the person inside is screaming to be noticed, and I've spent so long teaching them to be silent. I think about how easy it is to pretend, to perform, to put on a version of yourself that fits neatly into the expectations of others, the polite version that doesn't rock the boat, the version that smiles while the world is burning quietly in your mind. And then there's the aftermath, the stillness when no one is watching, when you finally let yourself collapse for a second and feel the truth of it all, and it's overwhelming. You realize that the energy you spend pretending to be okay has to go somewhere, and where it goes is inward, into the places that hurt the most, into the corners of your chest that are already tender and raw. Sometimes the struggle is so small that it barely registers externally, and sometimes it is so huge that it threatens to swallow you whole. And both can exist at the same time, both can coexist, both are valid, both are terrifying. The world doesn't see it, and maybe that's why it feels heavier. The world doesn't see the cracks in your voice, the way your hands shake when you think no one is watching, the way your chest tightens when you remember every unspoken thought you've ever carried. I've learned that the silent struggles are real because they leave a mark on your body, your mind, your presence, even when you think they haven't, even when you think you've hidden them well. I lie awake sometimes thinking about all the little moments where I betrayed myself without noticing it. Saying yes when I wanted to scream no, smiling when I wanted to cry, moving forward when every part of me wanted to stop, just to honor someone else's expectations. And it's a strange kind of exhaustion, a quiet, creeping tiredness that isn't about physical fatigue, but about living in a state of constant negotiation with your own soul. The quiet moments, the secret thoughts, the feelings that are too raw or too messy to show, they are heavy. And they are everywhere, inside everyone, quietly shaping the way we move through life without anyone noticing. The silent struggles are real because they are relentless. They don't take a break just because the world demands performance. They don't pause because you've had a good day or received a compliment. They exist in the gaps, in the pauses, in the spaces where no one is looking. And sometimes it feels unbearable. And sometimes it feels like the only thing that's real. They remind you that you are human, that you are fragile, that you are complicated, that you carry worlds inside of you that will never fit neatly into a conversation or a social media post or a smiling face. And yet, despite the weight, despite the exhaustion, despite the quiet ache of being unseen in your own life, there is a strange tenderness in the recognition of it all. To admit that you carry something invisible, something heavy, something real. It doesn't make you weak. It makes you alive. It makes you present. It makes you intimate with yourself in a way no one else can ever reach. And that is what makes the silent struggle so profound, so unshakable, and so utterly human. Some mornings I wake up and the first thing I notice isn't the sunlight or the quiet in the room. It's how heavy it feels to simply be here. How heavy it feels to inhabit this body, this mind, this life, and the courage it takes to do it at all. I think about it sometimes, the bravery hidden in the simple act of opening your eyes when you're not sure if the world deserves your presence or if you deserve to be in it. It's strange, isn't it, how survival itself can be an act of quiet rebellion, a small, trembling act of defiance against the weight you carry inside, against all the invisible pressures, against the ghosts of yesterday and the fears of tomorrow that hover above you like a low ceiling. I watch myself moving through the morning, making coffee, brushing teeth, checking messages, and there's a part of me that feels like a witness to it all, noticing how extraordinary it is that I'm still here, still functioning, still showing up, even when nothing seems to have shifted, when everything feels stagnant and endless and exhausting. There's a kind of courage in that, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that doesn't get medals or recognition, the kind that whispers quietly that you're still here, that you didn't collapse under the weight you've carried for so long. I think about the days when even the simplest things feel impossible. When the idea of leaving the bed, of facing the sunlight, of speaking to another human being feels like a climb you aren't sure you can manage. And yet there's a moment always where you do. You take a breath, you open your eyes, you begin. And maybe the world doesn't notice. Maybe no one acknowledges the effort it took to simply exist, but it doesn't matter because the act itself is revolutionary. It's evidence that you've survived the nights that tried to swallow you, the doubts that tried to convince you to stay small, the pain that wanted to keep you hidden. I think about the courage it takes to inhabit yourself fully, the courage it takes to live with the parts of you that are scared, ashamed, exhausted, and fractured. To look at your reflection in the mirror and not look away. To sit in the quiet of your own mind and not run from it. To feel the ache in your chest and the tightness in your throat and the exhaustion in your bones and still decide to breathe, still decide to move, still decide to exist even when existence feels like a struggle. There's bravery in that. A kind of bravery that the world rarely applauds because it's quiet, because it doesn't fit into achievements or Instagram posts or tidy definitions of success. I think about the moments when I want to disappear, when I want to dissolve into the background, when the effort of showing up feels heavier than any mountain I've ever climbed. And somehow I keep going, I keep moving, I keep existing. And I realize that this persistence is courage, that this continuity is bravery, that the very act of being present, even when your body aches, even when your heart hurts, even when your mind spins with questions it cannot answer, is itself a kind of defiance against the darkness that has tried to claim you. Sometimes I lie awake at night and reflect on the courage it took to survive all the small betrayals, all the disappointments, all the moments when I didn't recognize myself and had to gently coax myself forward anyway. The courage it takes to confront the parts of you that are ashamed, the parts of you that feel broken, the parts of you that have been silenced for so long and are only now whispering for attention on. It's exhausting, yes, but it's also remarkable because it proves that even when the world has been relentless, even when your own mind has been relentless, you are still here. You are still breathing. You are still carrying yourself forward. I think about courage as something invisible, something that doesn't roar or demand acknowledgement. It's not the dramatic gestures or the headlines or the visible victories. It's the quiet breath you take when you don't want to. It's the moment you allow yourself to wake up even when all your instincts are telling you to stay hidden. It's the soft acknowledgement that you are afraid and uncertain and trembling and you do it anyway. That is courage in its purest, most intimate form. There are mornings when I feel like I am barely holding myself together, like I am a fragile structure built from hopes I no longer trust, from past traumas I have not unpacked, from fears that have nested in the corners of my mind. And yet I rise, I exist. I go through the motions slowly, tentatively, carefully, and in that rising, in that existing, in that small, almost imperceptible defiance, there is a kind of heroism that I feel deep in my chest that makes me feel proud of myself in a way no one else ever could, because it is mine alone. I think about the courage it takes to witness your own humanity without flinching, to notice the parts of yourself that are weak, that are tender, that ache with longing, and to hold them without judgment, to let ourself feel fear, to let yourself feel doubt, to let yourself feel grief and exhaustion, and still allow yourself to breathe, to exist, to continue. There's something sacred in that, something intimate, something quietly revolutionary about the simple fact that you are still here, moving forward, showing up for yourself in ways that no one else can see. I think about the courage in repetition, in persistence, in simply surviving the cycles of doubt, the cycles of pain, the cycles of self-questioning that never seem to end. Every morning you wake up, you make a small silent declaration that you will exist today, that you will carry yourself, that you will honor the life you have, even when it's difficult, even when it's heavy, even when it's almost too much. And that declaration, made without fanfare, without applause, without recognition, is Koregi carry these moments with me, these quiet little betrayals I've committed against myself, the ones that almost never get noticed but leave scars that run deeper than anyone could imagine. They are small, almost invisible at first, just a word I didn't say, a feeling I pushed down, a desire I ignored because it didn't seem right or safe or practical. And over time, they pile up, these tiny betrayals, and they become something heavier, something that presses on my chest in the morning, that follows me into every interaction, every glance in the mirror, every attempt to reach for something I want or need. I wonder sometimes if anyone else feels this weight, or if it's just me quietly cataloging all the moments I let myself down without realizing it. Sometimes I think about the ways I've compromised myself to make others comfortable, the times I've silenced my own voice so someone else wouldn't be upset, the times I've smiled when I wanted to cry, laughed when I wanted to scream, stayed when every part of me wanted to run away. And I noticed how those compromises, small as they seemed at the time, accumulate into a kind of quiet erosion. They teach you to doubt yourself, to question your instincts, to second guess the parts of you that know what you need before anyone else could. It's exhausting and it's lonely, and it leaves you wondering if anyone could ever truly see the real you when even you have spent so long hiding it. I lie awake at night and replay all the times I've ignored my own needs, convinced that someone else's comfort or someone else's expectations were more important than my own. And the thing is, you tell yourself it's okay. You tell yourself it's love or kindness or patience. But deep down there's a hollowness, a whisper of betrayal that follows you into the morning, that waits for you when the world goes quiet, and you realize that self-betrayal doesn't announce itself. It creeps in through the cracks you didn't even notice were there. It lingers in your chest and your bones, in the way you hesitate before speaking, in the way you shrink slightly to fit the space the world expects you to occupy. I think about the people we let in, the ones we trust with pieces of ourselves, and how often we give more than we receive, how often we abandon our own boundaries to make others feel okay, and how that slowly, quietly teaches us to betray ourselves without noticing it. You start to question what you deserve, what you're allowed to feel, what you're allowed to want. And over time, the betrayals become habitual, a pattern woven into the fabric of your days. And it's hard to even remember a time when you didn't carry that quiet shame and that quiet weight. Sometimes the betrayal is easier to notice in hindsight, when you're lying in bed at 2 in the morning and the world is silent and the room is too dark and your own mind is the loudest thing you've ever heard. And suddenly you remember that promise you didn't keep to yourself, that dream you abandoned because it fell too far, that instinct you ignored because it wasn't convenient or safe. And it hits you in a way that feels heavy, as if the night itself has pressed down to remind you of all the times you failed your own heart, your own intuition, your own needs. And yet I realized that self-betrayal is not always dramatic. It's not always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet choices we make every day, the micro decisions that seem inconsequential, but over time define the distance we put between ourselves and the people we truly are. It's the tiny silences, the moments we swallow our truth, the gestures we withhold because we're afraid of being inconvenient or vulnerable or rejected. And those moments add up into a kind of grief you can't always explain. A grief that clings to your skin, a grief that colors the way you see the world, a grief that makes even ordinary days feel like a negotiation with your own soul. I think about mornings when I wake up and the first thought is not gratitude or hope, but the memory of every little way I let myself down yesterday, last week, last year. And the strange thing is, the world moves on anyway. The sun rises, the birds sing, the coffee brews, and life continues as if those betrayals never existed. And sometimes that makes it worse. The way the world is so indifferent to the ways we abandon ourselves, the way it expects us to show up whole and bright and present, when inside we're quietly carrying years of quiet, unseen compromise. I lie in bed and remember the times I've let my own boundaries be crossed for convenience, for love, for peace, for fear of being alone, for fear of being rejected. I remember the moments I betrayed my own instincts to please someone else, to make life smoother, to avoid conflict, to pretend I am smaller than I am. And I realized that the weight of those moments is not something that disappears. It doesn't evaporate with apology or reflection or passing time. It stays with you, sometimes quietly, sometimes loudly, until you confront it, until you name it, until you allow yourself to feel the full consequence of the choices you've made against your own heart. I think about how self-betrayal feels like a shadow you can't escape. It's in the way you hesitate, the way you second guess, the way you forgive too easily and hold back too much. It's in the small daily compromises that feel harmless in isolation, but strung together create a distance between who you are and who you long to be. And noticing that distance is both terrifying and liberating, because it is real, undeniable, and intimate in a way that no external judgment ever could be. Mornings have a way of showing you yourself whether you want to see it or not. There's a stillness in the air, a kind of quiet that isn't empty, that presses into you, that makes you notice everything you've been avoiding. You wake up and the room is silent, and suddenly you can't hide from the parts of yourself that have been tucked away, ignored, or silenced. The mirror doesn't just show your face. It shows the weight you carry in your eyes, the tension in your shoulders, the subtle collapse of someone who has been holding themselves together for too long. Sometimes I wonder if that is what mornings are for, to force you to meet yourself before the world starts asking for anything else from you. There are mornings when I lie in bed and just watch the ceiling, and I see all the compromises I made reflected in the corners of the room, in the faint light, in the way my body aches from things I've done to survive and please and exist quietly. And ties the hesitation in my own movements, the way my hands linger too long or too briefly on the nightstand, the way my chest rises and falls with tension I can't even name. It's unsettling to meet yourself like this, to realize how many layers you've built around your own heart how many pieces you've hidden in the name of endurance, and how fragile it all feels when the world is quiet. I think about the mornings when the first thought that comes is not hope, not gratitude, not possibility, but a memory you can't shake, a feeling you didn't want to acknowledge, a fear that quietly coils in your stomach. And in that moment, the mirror is everywhere, not just in glass, but in your mind, in your body, in the way your reflection feels like a witness to every choice, every compromise, every small betrayal you've made against yourself. It's intimate in a way that's impossible to ignore. And it's terrifying because it leaves no space to hide. Sometimes the mirror shows not just what you've done, but what you've avoided. The parts of you that have been silenced, that have been denied expression, that you thought would disappear if you simply ignored them long enough. But mornings don't let them disappear. They press forward with quiet insistence, and you find yourself confronted with yourself in the rawest way, noticing the shadows of old regrets, the subtle ache of unhealed wounds, the weight of desires you've hidden or abandoned. And it's exhausting because it's relentless, because, say, it's intimate because it doesn't allow for pretense. I think about the mornings when I feel small in the reflection, like the person looking back at me is a stranger who knows all the things I've tried to hide. And I realize that it's not really a stranger. It's me, the me I haven't been willing to fully acknowledge, the me that is afraid, uncertain, wounded, but also resilient in ways I rarely notice. The mirror doesn't lie. It doesn't offer distraction or convenience. It simply shows what is, what has been, and sometimes what could be if I were willing to meet it with honesty. There are mornings when I catch myself tracing my own expression, studying the lines and marks that time and stress and unspoken grief have left behind, and I feel a quiet ache because every line is a story, every mark a testament to endurance, and yet every story is one I have been reluctant to tell, every mark a part of myself I have neglected or forgotten. And in the reflection, there is a challenge that I didn't ask for, but that is impossible to ignore, to meet myself fully, to see my exhaustion, my vulnerability, my courage, my fear all at once without turning away. I think about the moments when the mirror shows you what the world never will. It shows your hesitation, your shame, your self-doubt, but it also shows the quiet courage that carries you through anyway. The small acts of persistence, the breaths taken when you want to collapse, the decisions to face the day despite exhaustion, despite fear, despite uncertainty. And you notice that in the reflection, the strength you have always carried, quietly, without acknowledgement, without recognition, and somehow that is more intimate, more revealing, more real than anything anyone else could ever see. There are mornings when I feel the weight of unspoken thoughts pressing against the silence, the echoes of moments I've pushed aside because they were inconvenient, because they were uncomfortable, because they forced me to confront truths I wasn't ready for. And the reflection shows those truths, whether I want to see them or not, whether I am ready or not, whether I am brave enough or not. And in noticing them, in allowing myself to feel them, there is a strange tenderness, a subtle acknowledgement that the person I see is trying in their own quiet way to be present, to endure, to carry themselves forward despite the weight. Sometimes I realize that the morning mirror is a teacher I never wanted, a guide I didn't ask for, but one I cannot escape. It demands honesty, demands witness, demands recognition of every tiny fracture, every subtle betrayal, every hidden sorrow. And yet in that confrontation, there is clarity, there is intimacy. There is a kind of raw, undeniable truth that shapes the way I move through the day, that informs the way I see myself in moments both small and large. I notice the subtle ways mornings teach me about myself, the ways they expose the parts of me that are soft, tender, scared, brave, all at once. And the reflection is patient in its insistence, unyielding, gentle, intimate, unforgiving. It shows me that existence is not simply about moving through hours. It is about meeting the self I carry, the one who aches, trembles, falters, and endures, And that noticing that self, seeing that self, holding that self is an act I have long forgotten to honor. There's a quiet kind of hunger I feel most mornings, a longing that has nothing to do with achievement, nothing to do with applause, nothing to do with the world telling me I'm enough. It's a hunger to be seen, to be recognized, not by anyone else, not by the milestones or the likes or the outward signs of success, but by myself. To notice the ways I survive, the ways I persist, the ways I show up when the world isn't watching. There's a loneliness in that recognition because it isn't loud. It doesn't make headlines. It doesn't fit neatly into a timeline of accomplishments. And yet it matters more than anything else, more than motivation, more than inspiration, more than the endless chase of external validation. I think about the mornings when I wake up exhausted, when my body aches from living, from pretending, from enduring, and the idea of pushing through or grinding harder doesn't resonate at all. And in those mornings, what matters is noticing that I am here at all, that I am breathing, that I am thinking, that I am facing the day despite everything that wants to pull me back into sleep, into high, ding, into the quiet that feels safe but suffocating. And the recognition of that alone, the acknowledgement that this existence is its own kind of courage, feels heavier, deeper, truer than any motivational platitude. There are moments when the world tells you to keep going, to be strong, to be productive, to smile, to act like everything is fine, and it's exhausting to respond to all of that when inside you feel small, fragile, tired, scared, and yet even in that exhaustion, there is something you notice if you pay attention, something that whispers, you made it this far. You persisted through another night. You didn't give up when it felt like the easier choice. And that recognition is intimate. It's raw, it's uncelebrated, and it doesn't need anyone else to validate it to be true. I lie awake sometimes thinking about the little things I do that never get noticed. The acts of endurance that the world doesn't care about, the moments when I held myself together, even though everything inside me was falling apart. And in the quiet, in that reflection, there's a kind of power that motivation alone could never give. Motivation pushes, drives, commands, demands. Recognition notices, acknowledges, honors, holds. And the recognition of yourself, of your own survival, of your own courage, is heavier than any pep talk, more sustaining than any cheer from outside, more intimate than any external approval. I think about the mornings when I feel invisible, when the world hasn't paused to see me, when the people around me don't notice the weight I carry, the quiet victories I claim each day. And there is a longing to be seen in those moments, but not for fame or attention, just to have my existence acknowledged in its rawest form, to allow myself to feel that my struggles, my endurance, my presence, my choices, my pain, my victories, all matter, even if no one else knows. Recognition from within is a shelter, a quiet kind of warmth that holds you together when everything else feels cold and indifferent. I notice the way self-recognition changes the way you carry yourself through the day. When you stop relying on applause, on affirmation, on the external signs that you are enough, you begin to notice the moments of grace, the tiny acts of courage, the small breaths of honesty that fill the spaces of your day. And each time you acknowledge them, the world feels a little less heavy, the self feels a little less fractured, and the act of simply existing becomes a little more sacred. It's not motivational, it's not performative, it's not a checklist, it's intimate, personal, unshakable. I think about how rare it is to give yourself that recognition, to stop long enough to notice the parts of you that persist, that endure, that are brave in ways no one else can see. The mornings are the hardest for this because everything is quiet, because the world hasn't started making demands yet, because the reflection staring back at you is honest, unflinching, and full of truth. And the truth is that you show up for yourself in ways that no external force could ever replicate. And that is more meaningful, more sustaining, more real than anything the outside world could ever offer. There are moments when I have wanted to chase motivation, wanted to find a spark outside myself, wanted to lean on inspiration as a crutch, and I realized it never lasted. Motivation comes and goes like the wind, like a wave that crashes and fades, and it leaves you standing in the same place, asking yourself why you're still here. Recognition, on the other hand, lingers. It's quiet, steady, persistent. It reminds you that you matter not because of what you achieve, but because you exist. Because you breathe. Because you endure. Because you acknowledge the parts of yourself that are tender, scared, fragile, broken, and still moving. I think about the mornings when I sit with myself, alone with my thoughts, noticing the way my body and mind have carried me through pain and fear and exhaustion. And I realize that there is a quiet kind of strength in that. A strength that isn't flashy. A strength that doesn't demand attention. A strength that is entirely yours. And that recognition, that acknowledgement feels like a small but profound victory. A tether to yourself that doesn't require anyone else's approval. A quiet validation that can sustain you through the chaos and indifference of the outside world. And in noticing these things, in giving myself the recognition I often withhold, I feel a subtle shift. A change that isn't dramatic, isn't loud, isn't the kind of thing you post about or brag about or expect others to understand. It's a slow, quiet settling, a knowing that you are enough in the raw, private reality of your own life, and that is far more enduring than any fleeting burst of motivation could ever be.